At 19, the future still feels wide open. Life is measured in plans, not endings. The mind is wired toward tomorrow, toward what could be, not what will be taken away. That is why the sentence landed not like a sound, but like a void. When the judge spoke the words, they did not echo. They absorbed everything. Death. Not immediately. Not today. But someday. For a 19-year-old standing in a courtroom, the meaning of that word could not fully register. The body heard it. The ears processed it. But the mind resisted it. Death, at that age, feels abstract, something that belongs to other people, older people, distant people. Not someone who still remembers high school hallways, who still carries the habits of adolescence, who has barely lived long enough to understand the weight of time. The courtroom was full, yet unbearably isolating. Faces blurred together, lawyers, spectators, officials, each one present, yet unreachable. Family members sat frozen, caught between disbelief and devastation. No one knew where to look. No one knew what to say. There are no instructions for witnessing a teenager being told he will die by the state. The sentence did not come with a date. That was the first cruelty. Instead, it came with uncertainty. Appeals would follow. Years would pass. The system would move slowly. But the end, whenever it arrived, was already decided. In that moment, childhood officially ended. Not gradually. Not naturally. It ended with a sentence spoken once and carried forever. The first night on death row is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet in a way that feels unnatural. The cell is smaller than expected, yet heavier than imagined. The door closes with a finality that does not ask permission. The sound of metal meeting metal does not just lock a body in place. It locks a future out. At 19, the mind still searches for reassurance. Surely this is temporary. Surely something will change. Lawyers will fix this. Evidence will surface. Time will reverse itself. Hope, at this stage, is raw and desperate. It clings to every possibility, no matter how fragile. But the environment begins to speak its own language. The routines are rigid. The hours stretch unnaturally long. The walls do not respond. Other voices echo down the tier. Older voices, tired voices, voices that have learned the cost of waiting. Death row is not just separation from society. It is separation from normal time. Days lose their meaning. Weeks blur. Seasons pass unnoticed. Birthdays come and go without celebration. At 19, the milestones of life, first real job, relationships, independence, are replaced by institutional schedules and controlled movement. The psychological impact begins subtly. Sleep becomes irregular. The mind replays the courtroom scene over and over, as if repetition might change the outcome. Small details become obsessions. The judge's tone, a lawyer's pause, a single word spoken too late. Regret becomes a constant companion, even when innocence is claimed, even when guilt is debated. The brain searches for control where none exists. The body is young, but the environment is designed for endurance, not growth. Physical strength remains, but emotional development stalls. Maturity does not follow its natural course. Instead, it warps under pressure. Some inmates grow hardened. Others grow fragile. Many fluctuate between the two. Letters from home arrive slowly at first. Family members promise support. They promise not to give up. But the distance is immense, and the system does not make maintaining relationships easy. Visits are controlled. Conversations are monitored. Physical contact is limited. At 19, connection matters deeply, and losing it begins to hollow something out. The realization that life will continue outside without him settles in gradually. Friends finish school. They get jobs. They move on. They stop writing, not out of cruelty, but because time keeps moving for them. For the one on death row, time stands still and stretches endlessly at the same time. The idea of aging in this place feels impossible at first. 19-year-olds do not imagine themselves at 30, 40, or 50 behind bars. The body cannot yet comprehend decades of confinement. The mind rejects it as unrealistic, as something that cannot possibly happen. Yet every morning, the reality returns unchanged. Psychologists often describe this as a prolonged state of suspended trauma. The brain remains alert, constantly bracing for news. Every interaction with guards, every unexpected movement, every official document carries the possibility of finality. Living like this reshapes thought patterns. Anxiety becomes baseline. Calm feels unsafe. At 19, identity is still forming. On death row, identity becomes frozen at the moment of sentencing. No matter how much the person grows internally, the system continues to see the same label. Inmate. Condemned. Case number. The world reduces a human life to paperwork. The presence of older inmates creates an unsettling mirror. Men who were once 19 themselves now sit decades later, worn by time and waiting. They speak differently. They move differently. Some offer advice. Others say nothing at all. Their existence serves as a silent warning of what time can do inside these walls. The first execution witnessed from death row changes everything. Even without seeing it directly, the absence is felt. A cell once occupied is suddenly empty. Conversations stop. The atmosphere shifts. For a 19-year-old, it is the first undeniable proof that the sentence is not symbolic. It is real. It happens. People disappear. That night, sleep is harder to find. Thoughts spiral forward for the first time instead of backward. This could be me. Not now. But one day, the family outside begins its own journey of trauma. Parents struggle with guilt and helplessness. They replay their child's upbringing, searching for missed signs, different paths, alternate outcomes. Siblings grapple with conflicting emotions: love, anger, loyalty, fear. The sentence reaches far beyond the prison walls. Community reactions vary. Some view the sentence as justice. Others question it. Many forget entirely once the headlines fade. But for the 19-year-old on death row, the story does not fade. It resets every morning. The most devastating realization comes quietly. Life will continue, but not forward. Growth will be internal, unseen, unrecognized. Achievements will go unnoticed. Failures will echo endlessly. The world will age without him. And yet, survival instincts remain strong. The mind adapts, even to unbearable circumstances. Routines form. Mental barriers go up. Hope changes shape. It no longer dreams of freedom. It dreams of delay, of more time, of another year. At 19, death feels distant. By the end of the first year on death row, it feels closer, not because execution is imminent, but because the concept has moved from theory to reality. The idea of dying someday is no longer abstract. It has a file, a process, a system. This is where the long journey begins. Not toward death, but toward waiting. Toward decades measured not in milestones, but in survival. And this is only the beginning. If you're still here, it means this story has already slowed you down. That matters, because stories like this are never meant to be rushed. They unfold the same way life on death row does, gradually, relentlessly, 1 year at a time. Stay with it, because what happens next is not sudden. It's far more unsettling than that. After the sentence fades from the headlines, the waiting begins. At first, time feels manageable. Days are marked carefully. Weeks are counted. Months feel long, but survivable. Appeals are filed. Lawyers visit. Words like review, procedure, and possibility still carry weight. For a young man sentenced at 19, the idea of decades has not yet become real. The future still feels flexible, even behind bars. But death row is patient. Years begin to pass without ceremony. The calendar turns, but nothing changes. Appeals take longer than expected. Motions are denied quietly, often without explanation that feels human. Legal language replaces emotional language, and hope begins to thin, not disappear, but stretch. By the mid-20s, something subtle starts to happen. The world outside continues moving forward at full speed, while life inside becomes repetitive to the point of distortion. Birthdays no longer feel personal. They feel symbolic, markers of survival rather than celebration. Each one whispers the same question: how many more will there be? The psychological toll deepens not through dramatic moments, but through repetition. Same cell, same meals, same routines. The mind begins to turn inward, replaying memories with increasing intensity. Childhood becomes sharper in memory than yesterday. Familiar faces begin to fade, replaced by echoes. If this story is making you uncomfortable, that's not an accident. Discomfort is part of the truth. This is what prolonged uncertainty does. It unsettles not just those living it, but those witnessing it. By the time his 20s give way to his 30s, the teenager sentenced to die no longer exists. In his place is someone older, quieter, more measured. The body changes. The face matures. Lines appear that were never meant to form in a place like this. But the system does not update its perception. On paper, he remains the same condemned 19-year-old. Appeals continue, but they feel different now. They no longer feel like rescue. They feel like delay. A successful appeal doesn't mean freedom, it means more waiting. More years suspended in uncertainty. Hope evolves into something more cautious, more guarded, because hope that breaks repeatedly becomes dangerous. Other inmates come and go. Some are transferred. Some are executed. Some leave unexpectedly after successful appeals. Each departure affects the atmosphere. Relief mixes with fear. Celebration mixes with dread. Watching someone leave death row alive is inspiring, but it also reminds everyone else how rare that outcome is. The executions hit hardest when they involve someone familiar. A man whose voice you've heard down the tier for years. A presence that suddenly vanishes. No graphic details are needed. The absence alone is enough. The silence that follows an execution carries a weight that never fully lifts. At this point, you might find yourself wondering how anyone survives this mentally. That question doesn't have a clean answer. Survival looks different for everyone. Some inmates retreat inward, limiting emotional attachment to protect themselves. Others form bonds that feel almost familial, knowing full well those bonds may one day end abruptly. The 30s stretch into the 40s. This is when time begins to feel irreversible. Parents age visibly during visits. Hair turns gray. Health declines. Conversations shift from encouragement to endurance. Some family members pass away before ever seeing a resolution. Grief becomes layered, mourning people lost while still waiting for an ending of one's own. If you're listening closely, you'll notice how this punishment extends far beyond the condemned individual. It quietly reshapes entire families. It forces them to live in a permanent state of anticipation, unable to fully grieve or fully hope. Inside the prison, routines harden. The days become predictable in a way that feels unnatural. The mind adapts by narrowing focus. Today's tasks, today's interactions, today's survival. Thinking too far ahead becomes dangerous. Thinking too far back becomes painful. This is also when the identity crisis intensifies. Who are you after 20 years of waiting to die? You are no longer the person who committed the crime or was accused of it. You are no longer the teenager from the courtroom. But you are not free to become anyone else either. The system offers no new role, no progression, no acknowledgement of growth. If you're still with this story, consider how rare it is in modern life to truly sit with time like this. No distractions, no escape, just waiting, decade after decade. As the 40s approach the 50s, the body begins to slow down. Health issues emerge. Energy fades. Medical visits become more frequent. The irony is impossible to ignore. Aging into frailty in a place designed for punishment, not care. Some inmates begin preparing emotionally long before they receive an execution date. They write letters they may never send. They make peace where possible. They detach where necessary. This is not surrender, it's survival. Others refuse to think about the end at all. They focus on routine, on conversation, on small moments of humanity, a shared laugh, a remembered song, anything that reminds them they are still alive now. And yet, the looming presence never leaves. The legal system moves slowly, but it never stops completely. Every few years, a development occurs. A ruling, a delay, a denial. Each one reignites anxiety. Each one reminds the inmate that their life is still under review, still conditional, still out of their control. If you've made it this far, you've already done something most people don't. You've stayed. You haven't looked away. And that matters. Because stories like this are often ignored precisely because they are slow, uncomfortable, and difficult to digest. By the early 50s, the waiting has outlasted most normal life chapters. Careers, families, entire generations. The world outside has changed technologically, culturally, socially. Inside, the changes are minimal. Time feels uneven, distorted. This is when the realization becomes unavoidable. The waiting itself has become the sentence. Not death alone, not execution alone, but decades of anticipation, decades of psychological strain, decades of existing in a state where tomorrow is never promised, but never arrives either. As 56 approaches, the weight of time presses harder. The man who was sentenced at 19 has lived nearly 4 decades under a death sentence. That is longer than many people spend raising families, building careers, or planning retirements. And yet, the end has still not arrived. This chapter does not close with resolution, because death row rarely offers neat endings. It closes with endurance, with the quiet persistence of someone who has learned how to survive inside a system built to make survival feel meaningless. If this story has stayed with you, don't let it fade the moment it ends. Carry it forward. Think about what it means to punish someone not just with death, but with time itself, because the waiting is not over yet, and what it does to the human mind is only beginning to reveal itself. If you're still following this story, it's because something deeper than curiosity has taken hold. That's important. This chapter isn't about dates or legal filings. It's about what happens inside a human mind when time becomes both endless and terminal. Stay with it, because understanding this part changes how everything else feels. The mind was never designed to wait for death without a date. In the early years, survival depends on denial. The brain protects itself by shrinking the future into manageable pieces. Today, this hour, this routine. Thoughts about execution are pushed aside, not because they aren't terrifying, but because thinking about them constantly would make functioning impossible. This coping mechanism works for a while. Then time stretches it thin. As the years pass, denial gives way to hyper-awareness. Every sound, every announcement, every unexpected movement triggers a spike of anxiety. The nervous system adapts to constant threat by staying alert even when there is no immediate danger. Psychologists call it chronic stress. On death row, it becomes a way of life. Sleep is the first casualty. Nights are restless. Dreams blur with memories. Some nights bring the courtroom back in vivid detail. Other nights bring imagined endings that feel so real the body wakes up shaking. Over time, sleep stops being restorative. It becomes fragmented, shallow, unreliable. Fatigue sets in, not just physically, but mentally. The mind begins to change how it thinks. Long-term plans disappear. Short-term thinking dominates. The brain prioritizes emotional survival over growth. Curiosity fades. Creativity narrows. Even joy becomes suspicious, something that feels unsafe because it can be taken away without warning. If you're listening closely, notice how this isn't sudden madness. It's gradual erosion. Identity fractures slowly. At 19, identity was still forming. By 40, it feels trapped between who he was and who he can never become. The system does not allow reinvention. It does not acknowledge growth. Any internal change happens in isolation, unseen and unvalidated. Over time, many on death row begin to detach emotionally, not because they lack feeling, but because feeling too deeply becomes dangerous. Attachment brings pain. Loss is guaranteed. Every friendship carries an expiration date, even if no one knows when it will arrive. This emotional distancing is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like coldness or apathy. From the inside, it is armor. Depression doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, disguised as numbness. Days blend together. Motivation fades. Even anger becomes exhausting. The mind settles into a muted state where extremes are dulled, because extremes hurt too much. Yet anxiety never fully leaves. Execution exists in the background of every thought, like static that never shuts off. Even during moments of calm, it lingers. The brain learns to live with it, but never without it. This constant background fear reshapes emotional responses. Small frustrations feel overwhelming. Minor setbacks feel catastrophic. If this story is making you pause, that pause is part of the experience. Death row forces reflection whether you want it or not. There is nowhere else for the mind to go. Relationships on death row are complicated. Bonds form quickly and intensely, forged by shared understanding. But they are also fragile. Trust is selective. Vulnerability is risky. When someone leaves, whether through transfer, release, or execution, the loss is deeply felt, even if no words are spoken. Grief becomes routine. And yet, there is also resilience. The human mind is remarkably adaptive. Some inmates develop strict routines to create a sense of control. Others immerse themselves in reading, writing, or study. Education becomes a lifeline, not because it promises freedom, but because it offers mental movement in a place designed to keep everything still. Faith, for some, becomes central, not necessarily in a religious sense, but as a framework for meaning. When the future is uncertain, meaning becomes a form of stability. It gives suffering a narrative, even if the ending remains unresolved. Still, the cost is high. Long-term death row incarceration often leads to what psychologists describe as identity dissolution. The individual begins to see themselves primarily through the lens of their sentence. Self-worth erodes. The idea of being more than a condemned person feels increasingly abstract. If you've made it this far, you're seeing what many never consider. Execution doesn't start on the final day. It starts the moment the sentence is handed down, and it unfolds psychologically over decades. Anger surfaces in waves. Sometimes it's directed inward, self-blame, regret, shame. Other times it turns outward, toward the system, toward society, toward fate itself. But anger, like everything else here, eventually tires. Sustaining rage for decades is impossible. What remains is often a quieter, heavier sadness. As the years accumulate, memory becomes both refuge and torment. Childhood memories are replayed endlessly, polished by nostalgia. Ordinary moments gain emotional weight they never had at the time. A laugh, a smell, a familiar voice. These memories provide comfort, but they also remind him of everything that was lost. If you're still engaged, consider how different this is from ordinary regret. This is regret without the possibility of repair. The mind also grapples with mortality in unique ways. Death is no longer theoretical. It has a process, a protocol, a procedure. Thinking about it becomes unavoidable, yet thinking about it too much becomes unbearable. The result is oscillation, periods of confrontation followed by periods of avoidance. Some days are manageable, others collapse under their own weight. The body mirrors the mind. Chronic stress affects health. Blood pressure rises. Immune responses weaken. Physical ailments emerge earlier than expected. Aging accelerates, not just biologically, but emotionally. The weariness is deeper than fatigue. And yet, moments of humanity persist. A shared joke, a quiet conversation, a moment of understanding exchanged without words. These moments matter more than they might anywhere else, because they remind the mind it hasn't fully disappeared. If you've stayed with this chapter, you've witnessed something rare, a slow, honest look at what prolonged uncertainty does to a human being. This is not spectacle. It's reality, stretched over time. As the execution date edges closer, still unknown, but increasingly inevitable, the mind begins preparing in ways it cannot fully control. Some inmates start organizing their thoughts, writing letters, reflecting deeply. Others resist entirely, clinging to routine and distraction. Neither response is wrong. Both are survival. What stands out most is this: the psychological toll does not end when the execution occurs. It radiates outward, touching families, fellow inmates, and even those tasked with carrying out the sentence. Trauma does not respect boundaries or job titles. If this story has held your attention, it's because it speaks to something universal: the fear of waiting, the burden of uncertainty, the need for meaning when control is stripped away. As this chapter closes, the mind has endured decades of strain, adaptation, loss, and quiet resilience. But the most intense period is still ahead, because knowing you will die someday is human. Knowing the system will decide when, and making you wait to find out, is something else entirely. And the closer that moment gets, the heavier the mind becomes. If you've stayed with this story until now, it's because something inside you recognizes that the hardest part is never the ending, it's the approach. What follows is not rushed, and it shouldn't be. These days unfold slowly, deliberately, the way time does when every second suddenly matters. Stay here. The weight of this chapter is meant to be felt, not skimmed. The notice arrives without ceremony. No dramatic announcement. No warning tone. Just paperwork. An execution date. Typed. Official. Final. After decades of uncertainty, the waiting ends not with relief, but with a chilling clarity. For 37 years, death was a looming possibility. Now it is scheduled. The mind reacts before the body does. There is disbelief at first, not denial, but a stunned stillness. This isn't fear yet. It's recognition. The brain shifts from someday to this day. Time, once endless, suddenly collapses into a narrow corridor. In the days that follow, routine becomes surreal. The same cell, the same walls, the same sounds, but everything feels altered, as if the air itself has thickened. Conversations change tone. Guards behave differently, more formal, more distant, sometimes quieter than usual. Fellow inmates notice immediately. Death row knows when one of its own has received a date. Word spreads without words. The condemned man begins to experience time in fragments. Minutes stretch painfully long, while days vanish too quickly. The body responds with physical symptoms: tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. Appetite fades. Focus becomes unreliable. If you're listening closely, you might notice how the fear here is not explosive. It is controlled, contained, heavy. Panic doesn't scream, it presses. The final visits are scheduled. Family members arrive carrying decades of unresolved emotion. For parents, this moment violates the natural order of the world. No matter how old their child becomes, watching him approach death feels unbearable. Conversations are careful. Words are chosen slowly. Everyone knows there is no perfect thing to say. Some families talk about memories, trying to anchor themselves in moments untouched by the system. Others talk about practical matters, personal belongings, letters, final wishes, because avoiding those conversations feels dishonest. Tears come in waves. Silence fills the gaps. If you've ever struggled to say goodbye, imagine doing it knowing this is not temporary. There will be no next visit, no future phone call, just memory. The condemned man carries guilt for the pain his family is enduring, regardless of guilt or innocence in the case itself. Watching loved ones suffer becomes harder than facing death alone. This emotional reversal, wanting to protect others even when you cannot protect yourself, is one of the quiet tragedies of this moment. The last call arrives. It is often shorter than expected, not because there isn't more to say, but because words fail under finality. Voices tremble. Some people repeat the same phrases: "I love you," "I'm sorry," "Stay strong," as if repetition might make them permanent. Others speak calmly, trying to offer comfort they don't feel. When the call ends, the silence is immediate and absolute. There is no transition, no soft landing, just the abrupt absence of connection. The final meal is offered. This moment is widely misunderstood. It is not indulgent. It is not celebratory. It is symbolic. A gesture meant to restore a fragment of autonomy in a life stripped of choice. Some select food tied to childhood, trying to reconnect with a time before confinement. Others decline entirely, their bodies already preparing for what's ahead. Eating becomes mechanical. Taste is dulled by stress. The act itself feels detached from hunger. What matters is not what is eaten, but what it represents, a final decision, however small. Inside the prison, the atmosphere shifts. Other inmates withdraw. Some offer quiet words of acknowledgement. Others avoid eye contact, not out of cruelty, but self-preservation. Watching someone walk toward execution forces everyone else to confront their own vulnerability. Cellmates are especially affected. Sharing a confined space with someone in their final days creates a unique emotional bond. Conversations deepen or disappear entirely. Some talk late into the night. Others sit in silence, listening to the sounds of the building, knowing those sounds will soon change forever. Correctional staff are not immune. Many have performed this duty before, yet each execution carries its own weight. Professionalism masks discomfort. Routine masks conflict. The system demands efficiency, but the human mind resists indifference. For some officers, this is the part of the job that never becomes easier. As the final hours approach, time distorts again. Moments feel suspended. The condemned man may reflect intensely or retreat inward. Some write letters until their hands ache. Others stare at the walls, conserving energy, bracing for what comes next. Emotional swings are common. Calm one moment, overwhelmed the next. If you're still here, notice how nothing in this chapter relies on spectacle. There is no need for it. The gravity speaks for itself. The final farewell message is prepared. This message is not meant for headlines. It is meant for those who will live on. Words are chosen carefully, knowing they may be read again and again by grieving loved ones. Some messages seek forgiveness. Others express love. Some focus on peace. All carry the weight of finality. No one writes these messages casually. As the hour approaches, movement increases around the cell. Procedures are followed. Protocols observed. Everything is methodical, designed to remove emotion from a moment saturated with it. The condemned man is escorted away. For those left behind, cellmates, fellow inmates, the moment is devastating in its simplicity. One presence disappears. A space becomes empty. The rhythm of the tear changes instantly. This absence lingers far longer than any sound ever could. Families wait elsewhere, suspended between hope and inevitability, even when hope feels irrational. Time stretches mercilessly. Every second feels invasive. If this story has held your attention, it's because this moment forces reflection, not just on punishment, but on process, on what it means to take decades to arrive at an ending. The execution itself is not the focus here. What matters is everything that led to it: the waiting, the psychological erosion, the accumulated grief. The execution is not a moment. It is the final consequence of a lifetime under sentence. Afterward, the system moves on quickly. Paperwork is completed. Schedules resume. The machinery of justice continues without pause. But the impact does not end there. Inside the prison, the absence settles in. Conversations are quieter. The memory of the final days hangs heavily. Some inmates withdraw further into themselves. Others talk more, trying to process what they've witnessed. Families leave carrying a grief that has no clear destination. There is no recovery timeline, no instruction manual, just loss layered on loss. If you've stayed until now, you've witnessed the cost of finality, not just for one person, but for everyone connected to them. This chapter is difficult because it forces us to confront something uncomfortable. Endings do not resolve suffering. They redistribute it. As this chapter closes, one truth stands out. The execution may mark the end of a life, but it does not mark the end of impact. That impact continues. And what remains afterward, what lingers in the minds of the living, is the final chapter yet to be told. If you've come this far, don't rush away now. The ending of this story isn't where most people think it is. The final moment didn't close the chapter. It opened a new one for everyone left behind. Stay with this, because what happens after is where the real weight settles. When the execution is over, the silence is immediate, but it isn't empty. Inside the prison, routines resume with unsettling speed. Doors open, counts are taken, meals are served. The system moves forward as if nothing extraordinary has occurred. Yet something is undeniably missing. A presence, a voice, a rhythm that had existed for decades and vanished in a single night. On death row, absence is loud. Cellmates wake up to a space that no longer answers. Conversations that once carried through the tier feel incomplete. The mind keeps expecting a familiar sound that never comes. Some inmates avoid the empty cell altogether. Others stare at it longer than they should, not out of curiosity, but disbelief. If you're still here, notice how the impact spreads. This was never just one life. For fellow inmates, the execution reinforces a truth they try not to dwell on. The system does not forget. It may wait, it may delay, but it eventually returns. Some retreat further inward, protecting themselves emotionally. Others become restless, agitated, struggling to sleep. A few begin preparing for their own endings long before they receive a date. Trauma on death row is communal. Correctional officers carry it differently, but they carry it nonetheless. Some speak of emotional numbness after executions, a necessary detachment that slowly bleeds into other areas of life. Others struggle privately, replaying procedures, questioning their role, wondering where duty ends and morality begins. The job doesn't end at the gate. It follows them home in silence. Outside the prison walls, the aftermath unfolds more slowly. Families experience a strange contradiction. The waiting is over, but the pain intensifies. For decades, grief was postponed, suspended by appeals and uncertainty. Now it arrives all at once, unfiltered. Parents struggle with an emptiness that feels unnatural, regardless of how many years passed. Siblings carry a loss that reshapes family dynamics forever. Children grow up with stories instead of memories. If you've ever wondered how grief changes over time, this kind of grief doesn't fade, it transforms. It becomes quieter, heavier, woven into everyday life. Communities respond in fragments. Some feel closure. Others feel unresolved anger. Protests may fade from headlines, but conversations linger quietly in homes, classrooms, and courtrooms. Opinions harden or soften. Questions resurface. Was justice served? Was the waiting itself a punishment too far? Who truly pays the price? These questions don't disappear. They circulate, generation to generation. The legacy of a death row execution is rarely clean. It leaves behind legal records, yes, but more importantly, emotional ones. Families of victims continue their own journey of loss, often complicated by the passage of time and public scrutiny. Families of the executed carry stigma alongside grief. Both are forced to navigate a world that expects resolution where none exists. If you're still engaged, it's because this story refuses to offer easy answers. And that's exactly why it matters. In the weeks that follow, letters arrive for the inmate who is no longer there. Returned unopened, marked undeliverable. These small administrative details cut deeper than expected. They serve as reminders that the world does not stop just because someone is gone. Inside the prison, new inmates eventually fill the space. The system resets, but memory lingers. Stories are told quietly, often at night. The name is spoken less frequently, not because it's forgotten, but because remembering hurts. For some, the execution becomes a turning point, a moment that forces reflection. For others, it becomes a scar, visible only to those who know where to look. If this story has made you pause, let that pause matter. The broader impact stretches even further. Policy debates resurface. Legal scholars revisit arguments. Advocacy groups cite cases like this as evidence of systemic strain. Supporters of the death penalty point to finality. Critics point to time. Decades lost, lives suspended, trauma multiplied. The man sentenced at 19 and executed at 56 becomes more than an individual. He becomes a reference point, a statistic, a symbol. His life reduced to dates and outcomes and discussions far removed from the cell where he waited. But behind every statistic is a human experience that cannot be summarized in numbers. If you're still listening, consider what it means to measure justice in years waited rather than lives changed. Consider how punishment transforms when it stretches across an entire adulthood. Consider how many people were altered simply by proximity to this sentence. Legacy is not chosen, it is assigned. The execution leaves behind unanswered questions not just for society, but for those closest to it. Family members replay final conversations endlessly, searching for meaning, reassurance, or missed signals. Cellmates carry memories that resurface unexpectedly. Officers remember moments they wish they could forget, and the story continues to live wherever it is told. If you've reached this point, you're now part of that continuation. By listening, by reflecting, by carrying this story forward, you've given it a place beyond the walls that once contained it. That's why stories like this matter. They challenge us to slow down, to look beyond headlines, to recognize that the consequences of a sentence do not end when it is carried out. They ripple outward, touching people who never sat in the courtroom, never entered the prison, never spoke a word during the trial. As time moves on, the name may fade, but the questions remain. What does justice look like when it takes a lifetime to complete? What does punishment become when waiting is part of the sentence? What responsibility do we carry when we choose not to look away? If this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Let it inform how you see systems, time, and humanity. Let it challenge assumptions. Let it spark conversations that don't have simple conclusions. Because the true aftermath of death row is not an execution. It's the enduring impact on minds, families, and communities long after the cell door closes for the last time. And that impact, quiet, persistent, unresolved, continues to shape the world in ways we rarely stop to notice. If you're still here, take one more moment. Sit with it. Carry it forward. That's how legacies are formed.